Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And when it comes to news for EVE Online, we obviously got a pretty big bombshell that dropped on a Friday, which is usually not a sign for good news. And I think it's definitely pretty interesting news for a lot of people. It's pretty bad news if I look at the reaction on the subreddit. And this is that CCP is going to increase the subscription prices by around 30% on May 17th. This is going to start. So far, I've only seen those prices in dollars, but it's going to be like $20 for a month subscription. And then, of course, you do get like a discount if you go for 3 months, 6 months, a year, and 2 years. I think are the packages. I would personally never really go over a year, but they are available, and this is a pretty steep price hike, which obviously angers a lot of players and is not what we expected, I think, just 2 weeks before FanFest, because, well, we also just saw what happens with Netflix. That's got some subscription problems, you could say. I thought one interesting post I read about this is that if you're a company and your business is a subscription model, the last thing you want to do is to put the subscription in the thoughts of your customers. You basically want that to be something that's on automatic pilot, and increasing the prices by 33% or 30%, something like that, is definitely going to make people think about their EVE Online subscription and if they're getting enough value for the money that they're spending. So that's going to be pretty damn interesting. On the one hand, personally, I can sort of see the economic thinking there. The reality is that we are seeing pretty massive inflation, and I can imagine that, you know, even for CCP, costs for labor, costs for energy, costs for maintenance, servers, all of that stuff is going up quite substantially. And I would personally not be surprised if CCP is basically at the forefront of something that we will see more and more of in gaming, which is increase in price. But of course, only the future can tell. Can't be sure of that. On the other hand, I also just read a post that someone at CCP said, yeah, we're going to announce probably our biggest content update yet for EVE Online. And so this is the other side. I think at this point, CCP announced the price hike is coming after FanFest, and that still gives them FanFest to basically sell you on the value of, well, the most expensive subscription in MMO at this point, because they do have pretty steep competition. I'm not sure timing-wise if this is going to be all that good, because Blizzard also just announced their new expansion for the World of Warcraft. You do have to pay for that expansion. That does make a big difference, of course, but basically for me personally, I'm now even more curious as to what CCP is going to announce at FanFest, because apparently, it should be an even better, cooler product than it is now, which I honestly don't see how that can happen without an expansion announcement at this point. If they don't announce, like, we're gonna bring you guys a massive expansion and there's gonna be massive new content, huge amounts of stuff to do, then I don't know. I really don't know what the thinking is there, and then it's purely an economical reaction to expected real-life inflation and things like that. So overall, I'm still in the wait-and-see pattern. I think a lot will actually ride on the FanFest that will come in just about 2 weeks. I'm curious also to see if we'll get like dev blogs and other announcements before FanFest this time. It's not that much time anymore, so yeah, we'll see, of course, and I will try to keep you guys up to date as well as possible. But this is probably going to dominate this EVE Talk, of course, and you may already have noticed that plex have definitely made a pretty big jump, but there's also another force at play here, and that is the current sale. So if we also take a quick look at the New Eden store, we got 2 items on sale, which is 1 month Omega and 12 month Omega, and instead of 500 plex you pay 425 plex, and instead of 6k plex you pay 5100 plex. So CCP is increasing, I think, or trying to increase the subscription numbers, enticing people to spend their plex now. But for the longer term, this right now means more demand for Plex, I think. And then on the longer term, the increased prices for subscription models are very likely to mean lower Plex supply as well, which, you know, has a pretty explosive impact on the price of Plex on the market. So if we go for ship skins, do we see any sales? No. Pretty cool looking skins, of course. CCP is getting pretty good at that as well. Apparel, we're not noticing anything too special, and so on the services. If you still plan to or have lots of Plex in reserve, at this point, honestly, I would not blame you to just go for, all right, I've got half a year of free game time in the Plex, I'm just gonna put it in here and then, or give myself the amount of time for free, basically, that I think I'll need to make my decision on the higher subscription for EVE Online. But this is, yeah, the reality, basically a double whammy for the price of Plex. Let's get rid of that and let's jump into the market with Plex and stuff coming in at 6 minutes pretty much. There we go. So obviously something that we don't see that often, a very sharp increase. You can see today's average price is at 3.5 million ISK, so a complete breakdown of what's happening for Plex. I think here volumes down the drain is also what you would expect, to be honest, because players are just gonna spend their Plex right now. That's what I would do if I wasn't a partner, and basically at this point CCP is paying my subscription for me. That value proposition is going up for the lucky few. So you can see that the volumes are actually going down on this sale, which is pretty unusual. And then you get the inverse response where volumes go up because you can pay less money, you know, to get 500 Plex. So supply goes up and price goes down. Here you can spend Plex more cheaply. You can get more subscription time for the Plex that you give back to CCP. And then of course prices shoot up. And on top of that, they're going to become more expensive. So prices shoot up quite sharply. And we are talking 3.6 million ISK now all of a sudden for the sellers. 20% increase in just a couple of days is pretty damn impressive, and buyers obviously in this market are forced up as well to practically 3.5 million ISK. If we take a quick look at the player owned trade hubs, very close. All the action I think is also going to be with online apps and things like that. So in JITA we are actually having the cheapest sellers and pretty much the best buyers as well at this point. So lots of movement here all of a sudden in Plex, and next week I think it's going to be pretty interesting as well to see the chart, because it could actually just shoot up all the way up in here. You can see those max prices actually touched, let's see if I can get like 3.7-ish million or something like that to show, above 3.7 million. We already had a sale for Plex through the min-max, and that's a pretty damn massive range. Maybe some people made some mistakes basically as well, dumping their Plex to like a wrong buy order or in the wrong place or something like that, because that's a huge graph for the min-max. That's man, going for the minimum from September, and then the maximum is of course the 1-year high point by quite a lot. For the multiple pilot train certificate, we do have a lot of interest all of a sudden, so very big volumes. I think here we should see an increase in price as well. So sellers are now up to 1.4 billion, buyers are at 1.3 billion. You can see here we're going up in price at the tail end. Basically, we were already running through or running out of these big volumes from the previous sale, but it took a long time for us to really get that upward trend going. And to chew through all of these. But I think here we just made a big catch up, of course, knowing that basically a subscription is going to cost more, and so a training certificate that is 1 month training time is also going to become more expensive. It's surprisingly muted though. I would have expected us to maybe make our way back to 1.5 billion at this point, but maybe there's basically still enough of this item in the system that's going to be a little bit slower. We'll take a quick look at these skill extractors that are of course going off the chart, and here no big mistakes being made. All of a sudden trade at the previous range, which was below 350 million on this chart, just stopped existing, and it was right here, probably the cheapest seller at the time became the lowest price all of a sudden, and then we're shooting up above 400 million ISK pretty easily, I think. Yeah, 410 million for the sellers of a skill extractor, and pretty much 385 million for the buyers as well. So everything that was below a certain price point got bought instantly and massively, and so we have a completely detached min-max bar here for today / yesterday. I think it's yesterday here, after downtime, with the announcement, of course, of the increased prices for plex and subscriptions. Impact on the injectors. Oh no, maybe we'll quickly do the multiple pilot training certificate as well. I think here, again, big volumes, increase in price, not super high, but it's already... oh no, this is a training certificate, excuse me. Here is the body resculpt certificate that I wanted to take a look at. All right, no immediate response here. Honestly, I think this one will become more expensive as well, but it's also, of course, a pretty niche item, now going for 320 million to 29 million for the buyers. You see just a couple are being traded a day at most, sometimes even none of them. So the response here is not very visible, except we don't have a min-max bar, so basically everything is trading on the seller side of things, and that's really it. That's all that's happening. So after that, we want to look at the injectors. Here are the large scale injectors, and yeah, the response is immediate. If extractors, because of plex, go up massively, we go up massively here as well. Start at below 700 million ISK, and we're now selling 710. Someone is still coming in, that's interesting. 730, 653, and the max price touches 800 million ISK. So not exactly sure what this chart is going to look like, but for now these large scale injectors are more expensive to the 630 mark. Obviously a very pronounced 1-year high point as well, but the min-max price might just be overdoing it a little bit. Let's see what the small skill injectors are doing. I don't think they can bug that trend. No, obviously here is the min-max chart. Average price above 150 million at this point, 153 for the sellers, 133 for the buyers. So a bit more margin here, a bit more hesitation on the buyer side of things. Perhaps the thinking is that, yeah, you know, maybe fewer players having multiple accounts will diminish the amount of skill injectors wanted in the game, because, well, you know, if price of one account goes up 33%, well, if you have 10 accounts, you can imagine it does become a very expensive proposition. But in all likeliness, they could like cut down 3 accounts to get back the same monthly cost. But if they do that, or if a lot of players that have those multiple accounts think like that, then the amount of injectors that will eventually be consumed will be down quite substantially. And so this is why we don't see as massive an increase in price as we're seeing with plex and the extractors. So that's those. Let's take a look at the daily alpha injector. No idea what this is going to do, but yeah, I haven't seen announced that these prices would go up or anything like that. So that's interesting. That one is not moving. We do have higher volume, so players are interested apparently all of a sudden in the daily alpha injectors, which maybe it's at the moment trading and anticipating more alpha players showing up, but that would actually increase the price. And we're seeing that 5-day moving average go down, and today's daily average, or yesterday's daily average, is actually at the lower part of the min-max of the chart. So let's see, we were at 50 million, we're at 48 million to 49 million for the sellers at this point, 44 million for the buyers. So it's actually still pretty damn expensive, but interesting. A little bit of downtrend. 5-day moving average below 20-day moving average does show a change in trend, and is on higher volumes. Not exactly sure what's happening here, but we'll keep an eye on that in the upcoming weeks. It could be interesting as well. And then we've got the hypercores finally that are also shooting up quite substantially. So they do follow the plex correlation up to 375,000. So that's another 20% increase basically, pretty easily for the sellers. 320,000 for the buyers. They're a little bit more careful on that one, but now we are substantially above the 300k. So this is of course the expected impact from the announcement from CCP. This category is going to become massively more expensive. And then my thought goes to, what will that mean for the rest of the economy? Because you could say that, yeah, everything might just become more expensive, but on the other hand, I would not be surprised if basically the pilot services part of the economy is going to start to drag in more and more ISK, which means less ISK available for the rest of the economy, and that could actually be deflationary. So we will of course see how that works out. It's difficult to predict in the sandbox. Let's move on to the minerals, coming in at 16 minutes. There we go. All right, still a decent catch up. Let's go. As always, we will start with titanium, and that's a strange range. I think this is the bug again, because I can't really imagine someone going for 25 ISK all of a sudden. And at this point, let's see if I can show the chart a little bit better here. Yeah, and then the other one is below 2. That's got to be a bug. So this one is still going down. 1 year low point for today's daily average, and we are talking about sellers. We do have to go to GDA on this one. 375 for the sellers and 371 for the buyers. So we are going to start forming a bottom, I believe, but the pressure is clearly on, and it's still, look at that, 128 million units. That's still a sizable chunk of titanium that the market has to absorb. So will like a 350 become the bottom? It's absolutely possible. We are clearly still seeing HiSec mining, especially titanium here, losing a lot of value. Next up, we've got a pyrite that finally is showing the first signs of forming a bottom, and 20-day moving average, 5-day moving average and daily averages coming together at around 7.5 ISK, which, you know, compared to the start of the year that started at 30 ISK is really pretty bad. And then most time was spent above 15 ISK, so that's still like a 50% loss even in the last 3 to 4 months. We're at 780 for the sellers, 730 for the buyers, and still 100 million coming in here as well, being nibbled at, but you can clearly see we are still massively supplied for what the economy needs. I think Mexon will not be able to stop that trend. Yeah, we're clearly seeing there's a little bit of an annoying bug here. But today's average is below 60, and the pressure is on as well. So we are clearly losing a lot of efficacy when it comes to your ISK per hour for HiSec miners. 61.22 to 57.18 for Mexalon. HiSec is under pressure. Next, we move to LowSec. Here is your Isogen mining with, not exactly sure this, I'm gonna assume again that, yeah, over 1000 ISK is another bug on the min-max part of the chart. So minerals do seem to, for some reason, be suffering quite heavily on that. So we'll try to zoom in a little bit. Above 300, but a little bit of hesitation here finally to just keep going up in a straight line. Isogen is selling for 355, buyers coming in at 340. Basically the mirror image of what happened with pyrite. Starts here below 100 ISK, ends the year at 350. Very nice gains. And then we'll quickly look at the volumes here as well. 1 million, 3.5 million, 3 million. Not 20 here, 13 here, those are a little bigger, a little bit older as well, but you can clearly see, in my opinion, that the active supply, the competition of what's, you know, point oneing each other here, is in much smaller quantities, which does mean, in my opinion, that much of the old reserves has now been put into the market, into stocks that will probably be used by larger groups and things like that, and that we are indeed coming towards that discovery phase. There are still a couple right here at 375. Someone is coming in with 40 million units, and we still probably have our very big one down here at 600 ISK with 200 million units, but the rest of it is way more muted than before. And so these higher prices, you can see this now here as well, bit of hesitation at the 300 mark. Now hesitation as we went above the 350. Sellers are still above that, but, you know, a bit of margin opening up here. So price discovery is finally starting with Isogen. Eventually we'll finally reach that normal average, and it is possible, if daily volumes go down enough, which I think at the moment they're not that high, that we will find ourselves in that pocket of active supply demand very quickly, where all of a sudden someone that loses patience and still has 20, maybe 50, 100 million units will disrupt that and will actually start bringing prices down by oversupplying the new dynamic that was all of a sudden formed. So it's going to be pretty interesting. My expectation is that while we still have potential to on the longer term go up in price, we could really start to see price fluctuations from here on out for Isogen. So be a little bit careful, right? If you want the most ISK and you're still holding Isogen or you're producing Isogen, try not to spook the market too much. I think patience and in small batches will tend to be the, basically dollar cost averaging will tend to be the best way of getting the most out of your Isogen from this point out. Before all of this, it was patience, of course, but now I think you can start to sell. Then we have Noxium from Losec, again with the annoying bug on the min-max chart. So we're at going down towards 1200 ISK, which is basically the average for the last 10 months or so. So this is not a complete breakdown or anything like that. This is basically, we were at 1400 ISK, which is very expensive. It becomes kind of interesting to risk a little bit of mining in Losec to maybe bring some more of that Noxium to the market, and then that supply is probably starting to bring the price back down. If there's too much of it, we'll go down towards 1100 to 1000 ISK, and then we'll get the reverse dynamic, which is, in my opinion, the healthy normal dynamic to expect for a Losec mineral. 1300 for the sellers, 1140 for the buyers. So Noxium still very, very reasonable. And if you look at everything that's being lost in high sec, I think it does become more and more interesting to at least make a couple of those smaller ships and try to risk a mining expedition in low sec. Get your ISK per hour up, and I think you'll see that if you are successful, you do have to, of course, be careful of pirates and things like that. You'll very easily get way more ISK an hour from your low sec expedition if you know what you're doing, of course. So yeah, risk versus reward. Then we move on to nullsec. Here is the Zydrine chart with still the bug, very annoying. But today's average is clearly down. Let's see what the prices are doing here. Below 1100 now for the sellers and below 1000 ISK for the buyers as well. So Zydrine is not able to defend that 1100 plus price range. And here I think the difference, right, you can see that here in this Noxium chart. If we zoom in a little bit, you do have like a trend shift where, all right, it's low in price, we're starting to slow down our supply, prices go up. We managed to maintain those prices for a couple of months and then we start to go down. What you have, in my opinion, in Zydrine are longer stretches of more stable prices which are set by those sellers, because here we don't have as much risk as in low sec and we get larger groups as well, so you potentially have way more stability. It's interesting to see that we are starting to lose a little bit of ground on Zydrine. Maybe there is just a little bit too much competition out there at the moment. It's not a uniform cartel that dictates every single piece of Zydrine, of course, and as a result, right now we're losing a little bit of ground on Zydrine. I think for Megasite it's the same. It did just climb to a one-year high point at 1250, and so we're down to 1140 for the sellers and below 1000 ISK here for the buyers as well. So they are definitely trying to get those prices to go a little bit lower, and the min-max price is showing that now some people are actually selling to those buyers well below 1000 ISK as well. Finally, we got Morphite for Take 2 that's shooting up here. If you look at that max price, unless it's a bug again, let's take a quick look at this. 43k, sellers coming, yeah, it's a bug again. 44k for the sellers, 41k for the buyers. So Morphite slightly up, but definitely at the low range for this one-year chart. Again, the historical perspective, I used to buy Morphite as an investment when it went below 10,000 ISK, and then 18k was like a dream trade or something like that. So it's still extremely expensive, but definitely in a better spot than 10 months ago or so. And then the chromodynamic tricarboxyls, yep, that's apparently what they are. They went under pressure and are basically forming a bottom when below 25,000 ISK and are pulling back up just a little bit. 50k for the sellers, 24k for the buyers. So a little bit less dumping happening to those buyers below 25k, and a little bit more patience needed at this point in the chromos, let's call them that, to make it short. All right, moving on to PI next. That's coming in at 24 minutes. Let's go. Let's see what's happening here. Not sure if the Plex announcement will already hit the PI market. We did have the announcement, of course, of Siege Green. I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen here, but let's just take a look. I kind of wonder here again from above 1.5 and then a minimum price at 1.25 million. Let's see what's happening here. Yeah, 1.6 million for the sellers for broadcast nodes and 1.25 million basically for the buyers. This means that someone already sold to a buyer and someone already bought from a seller at this point. Average price is still dominated by the high end of the curve here. So for now, maybe a bit of a sign of some pressure, but in general, we are talking 1.5 million for the broadcast nodes, which is pretty average, pretty normal. So my conjecture on this, because they did of course announce that there were going to be nerfs to the PI needed in production of larger ships, that basically for advanced PI material players are expecting the loss on an individual industry job to be made up by the volumes that it's going to unlock, basically. So interesting that we are pretty stable here. Now those that might lose a little bit more, here's construction blocks landing on 8k. I think that's actually quite reasonable here. Demand picking up on that decreased price. 8,400 for the sellers, 8,000 is for the buyers. So we're not crashing straight through the 8k or anything like that. We're definitely staying at the high end of the chart. So maybe overall we could get that dynamic going where players are saying, sure, the individual ship will require a lot less PI, but if you're gonna make big batches of dreadnoughts, you're still gonna need pretty much as much PI as you do right now. And so overall the price impact could be quite okay. This is then not what I expected. I would have thought that it would still require quite a bit of consumption of fuels as well. But here, coolants are clearly going down substantially. All of a sudden, down to 8,300 for the sellers, 7,800 for the buyers. Our high period, which was basically the start of the year, seems to be over, at least here in the coolants. This is a sharp drop off, losing around 20% of the price. Was above 10k for quite a while. This is really where you should have sold. I have been doing that, actually selling in not too big batches, trying not to spook the market too much, but consistently selling. And I still have some coolants out there, but I definitely sold the majority of what I was holding. And yeah, this times don't last forever, of course. And so here we see our first real pullback in the price of coolants. Then we get enriched uranium. That one is still doing quite well, but yeah, maybe look at coolants as your canary in the coal mine. Might not stay there for too long. 11,000 for the sellers and almost 11,000 for the buyers. So if you have enriched uranium that you want to get rid of at a good price, this is your 1 year chart. You can see what's happening in coolants. I would say that this is also the time to try to sell without spooking the market too much. Integrity response drones back above 1.5, pretty average, I would say. Actually almost 1.7 million for the sellers and almost 1.6 for the first buyer. So here we basically have a little bit of pressure, but I think it's basically supply coming in from the opportunity of selling close to 2 million, so nothing too crazy. Mechanical parts starting to lose ground as well, below 9,000 disc on average, 9k for the sellers, 8,500 for the buyers. Again, that warning that the fuel dynamic, or at least the PI tied to fuels, does seem to be coming under pressure. Maybe there has been a switching of production. I've mentioned it quite often. It's always been my go-to for PI because it's so easy to produce, but that also does mean that it's easy for players to switch to production from other PI materials to PI materials related to fuels, and that could be what's driving supply up and what's driving prices down as well. Miniature electronics, 10k, pretty average here, 10.5 to 9.8, pretty narrow margin here, but above 10,000 disc is quite reasonable as well. Probably going to be a little bit harder to make though. Or is it 100k? It's no, it's refined. Yeah, there we go. Nano factories try to get back to 1 million, but supply is probably bringing us down a little bit. Very close to 1 million now for the sellers, 950,000 for the buyers though. So again, those buyers are there for this advanced PI material. I do think that players are hoping to make more larger ships. Organic mortar applicators, a little bit of a spread on the min-max. But for now it's 684,000 to 643,000. Pretty narrow spread actually. So this could be the bug here again. because we don't have a 600k buy order or anything like that. On average, pretty much pressured, right? Definitely cheap organic mortar applicators, but we also know that the industry changes did make a difference between those advanced PI materials. It used to be way more uniform in price range, but now you have some that are needed a lot more than others, depending on the chip type and so depending on the choices of players. Recursive computing module, actually a little bit of a bump for the week. 1.3 million for the sellers, 1.2 million for the buyers. So here a bit more interest, definitely on the high end of the chart. Then we've got our robotics continuing to see a little bit of pressure. Was trying to get to 70k, is now down to 69,500 for the sellers and 65,000 for the buyers. Bit of demand dropping off here, I think. That is putting pressure on some of these PI materials. Rocket fuels also still above 10k, but you can see a couple days ago here average price at 9.5, so 10,400 for the sellers, 9.4 for the buyers. But we're seeing more supply, I think. We're seeing maybe a little bit less demand as well, but whichever is high is starting to see a lot of pressure. Self-harmonizing power cores did go to 1 year low point above 2 million ISK, so that supply came online pretty quickly. 1.8 million for the sellers, 1.7 million for the buyers. I'm gonna say that this, for instance, is one of those advanced PI materials where players expect the need for that to go up with the industry changes and the increased potential for building certain large ships rather than others. Massive volumes push the price above 2 million. Smart fab units, 70k, so that's in line with the robotics. I would say 71 to 57,000. Bit of margin opening up here again. That demand might just be dropping off a little bit. We'll see. Sterile conduits went also pretty expensive to 1.5 million, still above a million, almost 1.1 for the sellers, and still above a million for the buyers as well. So there's actually a difference, I think. Whatever is tied to larger ship production, in my opinion, is actually still seeing pretty strong demand across the board, but you get some intermediate units where demand all of a sudden is going down. Supercomputers are doing okay, also the 70k range, 69.5 to 64,000, that's quite reasonable. Synthetic oil next, pretty stable, decent range, not much of a move over the last week, 8,000 to 7.7, that's pretty narrow margin, so you can see here a pretty stable price. Synthetic synapses pretty high at the moment and losing a little bit, but doing quite reasonably in my book, 93,000 to 85,000. That's still quite reasonably a reasonably small margin. We're clearly seeing pressure, but again, when you go above 100,000 ISK, 1 year high point that you're seeing pressure, that's quite normal. Transcranial micro controllers are also pretty expensive at the moment, 88k, almost 90,000 for most sellers and 80,000 for the buyers, less than 10% margin, so again quite a reasonable range here. Water-cooled CPUs are up in price to 6.4 and 5.8. That's still not a great price, but this could be one of those indications, right? At the moment, and when you're looking at the coolant chart, and then you're looking at your water-cooled CPU chart, there might be enough players out there that decide, I'm just gonna scrap my water-cooled CPU planets and I'm gonna make a couple of coolant planets. It's just gas planets, super ubiquitous, super easy to set up, and you're getting almost double the price for your production cycles. And this is why potentially coolants is going down now in price and water-cooled CPU is actually going up in price, despite the fact that it's had a pretty bad year. And then finally, we got the wetware mainframes that are just below 1.5 million, right around the average, I would say, a bit above that for the sellers and a bit below that for the buyers. So the margin here is quite narrow as well. So PI is a bit of a mixed picture. I think the market is trying to figure out what the exact state of things will be after the industry changes actually hit the server, and CCP makes it easier to build, well, a lot of ships, battleships as well, faction ships as well, and the larger capitals and supers will all see their production costs reduced. A lot of it will be through the PI mechanic or part of their production cycles, but of course more production also does mean more demand, and so yeah, we're not sure exactly where things will land. Next up, the advanced moon materials, 3410. There we go. So thank you very much for the guys commenting and giving me the different races for the different goods. So I think we'll be able to go with Galente, Minmatar, Amar, and Caldari like that. As always, we'll start with the carbide. So here is crystalline carbonate for Galente production. That's just above 100 ISK, but falling back down in the last week on the 5-day moving average. So a bit of a bounce after we went below 100 ISK, but oversupply is just a reality at the moment. 111 for the sellers, 108 for the buyers. Very narrow margin, and supply keeps pouring into crystalline carbonates. That's basically putting more and more pressure on this good. It's staying super low. Next, for the titanium carbide for Caldari production, a little bit more substantial on the chart, but we again went below under disk for something that's actually normally more expensive than the other ones. I think Caldari ships are the more popular ones to build, and as a result we're now at 129 to 127, so that margin again is pretty low, and I honestly think that this is enough of a price bump for the last couple of weeks that we will see substantial supplies come in and that we will see more pressure back on titanium carbide in the upcoming weeks. We'll see, of course, if I'm right or wrong on that. If demand actually picks up enough for some reason, then things might be different. Then we've got Minmatar, so here is Fernite carbide. There's that pressure, 1 year low point well below 100 ISK, 91 for the sellers, 86 for the buyers. So this is basically the dynamic of the moment. We're massively oversupplied. Because of all of that moon mining that's happening just across the board in huge amounts, and this is the result of that. Again, if you look at this, if you look at what's happening with the Galente one as well, that's starting to see pressure. I think this won't last very long. This is now from the list by far the best one to bring in. You get the best price by like 30% compared to the others. Let's see if tungsten carbide for Amar is doing anything differently. Well, it's starting to show signs of strain here as well. We went to 110 pretty much here. Then we managed to make our way back above 125, but you can see here we are starting to go down quite substantially, quite quickly. 127 still for the sellers, 121 for the buyers. But in order to get these average prices, that means that most players actually at the moment are just straight up selling to those buyers. They're going to start to open up a margin. Sellers are going to feel the pressure to put in more tungsten carbide as well at lower prices. I think we are on the down cycle for both tungsten for Amar and the titanium for Caldari production. Impact on metamaterials, we start with Galente, so that's photonic metamaterials, went down to 7.5. Yeah, it's going to be that same dynamic here as well, of course. Eventually you break some price range where the market says, yeah, maybe we should start investing in that for like the longer term, and so that's apparently was 7.5. Starting to move up a little bit from that, but definitely very carefully. 8.2 for the sellers, 7,700 ISK for the buyers. 20-day crossing the or 5-day crossing the 20-day moving average on the upside, but again, I don't think it's meant to last all that long. After that, we get non-linear metamaterials for Caldari. That's forming the bottom at the moment. So 12,500, I think here is the price where the market says, yeah, maybe that's low enough all of a sudden. Again, losing 50% over the course of a year is quite substantial. We're back up to almost 14k for the sellers and 12.7 for the buyers. It's pretty obvious, in my opinion here, that the Caldari section has more volumes, a bit more volatility, a bit more action in it than most of the others. So I do expect here that we could see a pretty substantial bounce all of a sudden. But again, the longer term, I think the pressure is just unavoidable and is going to continue. For Minmatar plasmonic metamaterials, just like with the carbides, the pressure is on towards 10,000 ISK, 11 for the sellers, 10.4 for the buyers. Pretty narrow margins, probably forming a bottom here yet again, but 1 year low point right now. And then for Amar, it's terahertz. That's this one. That's also doing the landing on 10,000 ISK at the moment. 10.4 to 9.7, in fact. That's quite low, the lowest buy price, I think, across the board here, well below 10,000 ISK. Again, high point about a year ago, 20k, and now we're at 10k. So pretty much a 50% loss here in the value as well. Let's Still have some others to take a quick look at. So here is fermionic condensates landing on 40k, 1 year low point. Then we've got ferrogel, went below 20,000 discs, playing with 22.5 from time to time. So again, 1 year low point or trade range. Fullerites, same story. A bit of a bounce here when we went to, what is this landing on? Below 450, right? Bit of a bounce, but no. And this is really the danger of this dynamic here. This might look like an awesome jumping point, 450, 1 year low point, way lower than the 650 we had just a month ago. And yet you are still catching that falling knife, because right now we are selling for 420 and buying for 391. So those that went in at the 425, they are already looking at losses right now. So these volumes, yeah, not the smartest ones. Then we get hypersynaptic fibers doing the crash right now, going below 6,000 disc. Again, here in April, bit of a bounce back above 8k, and then you lose another 20% or so. So 5.6 to 5.5, super low, super pressure. Yeah, moon materials, guys, are just massively oversupplied. Nanotransistors, 1 year low range. Phenolic composites doing a little bit better, but again, 2,000 disc at the start of the year. A little bit of 1k right now, 1150 to 1150, pretty narrow margin. So we're not, well, actually I was gonna say we're not too likely to crash down right now. No, looking at all the other charts, what are you going to try to make and bring to the market? It's gonna be phenolic composites, so I would not be actually surprised if you start to go down substantially next week on this one as well. Pressurized oxidizers is actually able to buck the trend, went to 10k, but is actually doing a little bit of a bounce on that one. 11,000 for the sellers. Oh, what about those buyers? Where are they? 4,800 disc. Let's see what happens here next week. That could be in for a crash as well. Then we get reinforced carbon fiber, a little bit more in line with what we expect, right? We get the 10k line, and then we're pulling away from that, just going down under general pressure. 7,100 for the sellers, 6,900 for the buyers. Yeah, surprised that these sellers are still able to do their thing. Let's see if player owned trade has something to do with that. Nope. So yeah, next week for pressurized oxidizers, if you're holding, I think you're going to be looking at some pretty substantial losses. And finally, the ceramic fibers is doing the bounce from a 1 year low point when below 200 discs, starts the year at 800 discs, losing 75% of its value over the course of a year. The market here says, yeah, we're definitely gonna start to move in on this one, and actually pushes the price up by 50% towards 300 discs, 290 for the sellers, 280 for the buyers. But how long can that last? We will, of course, see. The general trend in advanced movements is pretty obvious. We are massively oversupplying that market. Next up then, the Tech 2 ships. I removed a couple of them and we're going to go through these pretty quickly, mostly trying to spot buy or maybe even sell opportunities, but 42.25. 42.25. My personal expectation is that the pressure will be on pretty much across the board. So we're really looking for exceptions. Here is the Basilisk chart. Who would have thought that you would be selling Basilisk for 123 million, buying them for 116, when a year ago they were going for 250 million. Here we are, Tech 2 ships, 1 year low point, yet again, massive pressure on the prices. Which is not very good news for me personally, of course, because I did buy some Tech 2 ships, thinking, for instance, here, buy the dip, and now, right, looks like the oversupply of advanced movements is just crushing prices for Tech 2. So I'm actually holding a lot of pretty expensive Tech 2, well, not a lot, some pretty expensive Tech 2 ships. Then we've got the Cerberus doing a little bit of a bounce, but yeah, average price here was 140 million. We're now selling for 160. Actually, we tried 170, and then someone comes in with 15 Cerberus at 160. So people are just willing to sell at these massively low prices right now. 146 million for the buyers. A bit of a bounce. Is this tradable? In my opinion, no, because I think we could go even lower at this point. It's very, very dangerous. The curse is also back on the 1-year low range at around 150 million, 151 to 147. Not a lot of demand going on at the moment. This is actually the most tradable chart so far. So if you're buying now well below 150 and you could then potentially sell at 200 million, that would be pretty nice. But will that happen again, considering advanced movements and what we're seeing in the other Tech 2 ships? I am not sure. If you want to take a risk, sure, try to buy a curse at the moment. It's the right time to put up a buy order, right? You're very likely to grab one for less than 150. Then we've got the Damnation 1-year low point, bit more in line with what we expect here, 295 for 250. So you're buying a Damnation for 250 million at the moment. Then we get the Deacon, right? 1-year low range trade as well, but touching 20 million, and it's done so before. So 21 for the sellers, below 20 million for the buyers. Same story. Be careful because, you know, you can see here on the Basilisk, new lower ranges are definitely a possibility. Eagle, exact same thing. I mean, honestly, if we're seeing this type of a chart, the EOS has a little bit more bounce in it, but just doesn't last. It's back below 300 million, 293 to 210, pretty much for the buyers. That's a huge margin, and that's actually very enticing to try to buy, but also very dangerous because it clearly shows that that 300 million average range is not very likely to be defended. We're very likely to actually maybe get a 250 range or something like that for the EOS if this continues. The Ares, 40 million, yeah, again, you can buy, but be very careful. Then we get the Flycatcher, did a bit of a bounce to 75, back down to 50. The lower end of the range. Guardian showing that yeah, lower ranges are indeed possible, down to 130, 125 for the sellers, 118 for the buyers. Heretic, same story. Hound, same story, is now below 20 million, and the real question is, will we be able to bounce back above 20 million? Ichthyrsa for the Triglavian stuff, also seeing the pressure, despite the fact that I think it's not that related to advanced movements. Pressure is on here as well. Let's see what those buyers are at, 570, so definitely pretty low. Then we got the Ishtar, 150, and now going below 150. Look at that, just it's not stopping. 140 for the sellers, 122 for the buyers. Kirin, same chart. Manticore, same chart, actually below 20 million now for the Manticore, 18.6 million for the sellers, 18 million for the buyers. Had it been any other market than the one we're seeing right now for advanced movements and Tech 2 ships, this would have been like, buy massively, buy those Manticores below 20. Look at this chart, 30 million, 25 million, easily defended for the first 10 months of the chart, and now we get a breakdown with sellers coming in below 19 million. It's crazy prices for the Manticore, but is this a no-brain buy? Well, I'll be honest, I don't think so. Let's see what's next. Here is the Monitor, same chart yet again. I mean, we don't have to go too much into detail. Even the Nemesis is breaking down, currently selling for 14.5 million. 20 million was always like, all right, below that seems interesting. Now we are buying a Nemesis for 11 million. You're buying a stealth bomber for 11 million. It's a Tech 2 ship. Nighthawk, touching 300 million. Oneros touching 100 million as well. Purifier or one exception so far, but how long can it sustain itself under that general pressure here? 21 million for the sellers, almost 20 million for the buyers. Pretty impressive Purifier market, but why the hell would you buy a Purifier when you can basically buy two Nemesis stealth bombers for the price of one? So that just becomes such a crazy thing that I think the pressure will be on for the Purifier next. Then we get the Rook, 150, so the low range. Saber, 1 year low point pretty much as well at 40 million. Scalpel, well below 20 million. Scimitar, 130, that's pretty much the logistics cruiser range there. Sleipnir, 1 year low point now, going below 300 million, really selling 283, buyers 258, 259 pretty much. That's definitely pretty cheap as well. Then we get the Thalia is under pressure. Yeah, substantially below 20 million, I would say. Here is the Vagabond, exactly as well. Let's see, 150. And then the Zarmast, which is our Triglavian logistics. a little bit better, a little bit different. You can see here, definitely not at the 1 year low point range, going for around 500 million ISK, 550 to 461, which is a pretty decent margin. So that to me does mean that, yeah, this is not the same story with the Triglavian ships, Tech 2 ships, as with the other Tech 2 ships. And so that puts this, where is it, the Iquitursa, that's actually at the low end of the wave, in kind of an interesting spot. If you can buy one well below 600 million, and then we try to look at the higher end of those ranges, you can sell them here for 630, maybe even 650 with a little bit of luck. So if you're feeling like gambling at the moment in Tech 2, there's a lot of very cheap Tech 2 ships that you can buy. And maybe it's actually the right one, because we still don't know what's coming out for FanFest, and it could be something that is going to drastically change this landscape as well. I'm not sure if this is what CCP intends, where basically those Tech 2 ships are now in all likeliness way cheaper than faction, pirate faction ships, navy faction ships. This is just becoming kind of ridiculous. I think how low some of these are going. 10 million ISK for a stealth bomber. Practically, that's kind of crazy. So maybe CCP will do something about that. So if you want to take that gamble, that CCP trade, then yeah, stock up on cheap Tech 2 ships right now. That would be the answer. But of course, it's still difficult to say. So if you're looking for something that's probably a little bit more stable, then maybe the Triglavian ships could be the place to place bets for, like the shorter term, because we clearly have a way more wavy pattern and more clear low points on this one as well. It's actually 500 million, so you're not in the best spot right now, but you can, in my opinion, actively trade Triglavian ships. It does require like half a billion or a billion is pretty much to trade just a single ship on that one. But it's in a different spot than the rest of these Tech 2 ships that are just massively under pressure. Next up, Tech 3 ships then, coming in at 51 minutes. And there we go. As always, we start with the destroyer. So here is the Confessor, still below 50 million ISK. I didn't think we saw that much supply in the last Eve talk. Yeah, it's okay. 815, half a dozen new sell orders, nothing too crazy, and we're at 48 million for the sellers, 45 million for the buyers. The Hecate is recovering from its bounce. Oh, guys, I'll quickly drink here. So I can keep going. Sorry about that. So went from 65 million down to 55 million. We should see substantial supplies here. It's actually not that crazy. 3 sell orders, almost 30 ships in the last 24 hours. A bit more in the last couple of days. So there's definitely some supplies, but it's a slow burn down to 56 million, which is a bit of a surprise considering how much of a margin you get compared to the Confessor. And then the Hecate. Oh, did I misclick on that one? So the Hecate is actually going up to 56 million. So there's a bit more supply, but it's still nothing. I wonder where all of the supply has gone. And what is kind of strange, 56 million for the Jackdaw, 56 million for the Hecate, 48 million for the Confessor, and then we'll end right here with this Vapel. That is starting to basically slow down, is back at the high end of its trade range, 47 million for the sellers, 42.50 for the buyers. And this to me is starting to feel across the board like a bit of a decoupling from pretty much the entire market. Now this could be the Confessor. You'd think with it being so cheap that this supply would be way lower than the Hecate and the Jackdaw that is selling at 56 million, but no, actually all these supplies are still in line with each other, and that could indicate that we're basically that the market is starting to see every ship as an individual market, and that industrialists don't want to plug gaps or anything like that. You're making Confessors, that's what you're doing, you get your cycle, you're happy with your 48 million. You're probably feeling pretty lucky with your 56 million for your Hecate and your Jackdaw at the moment, and then those Vapel guys are just happy to sell a couple extra at 46, 47 million, 45 most of the time probably. And as a result here, there seems to be maybe a little bit of inertia in the amount of ships that are being supplied and produced to these markets that are just stuck in their ways, and that there's not that much energy or will or whatever it is to take advantage of higher prices to then slow down on other ships or things like that. That's my read on this. I could be wrong, right? By next week we could start to see some real moves or something like that, like massive supplies in Hecate and Jackdaw, a drying up in Confessor and Zweppel, and those prices starting to go back up towards 50 million ISK. But considering the supplies that I'm seeing right now, I don't see that happening. So very, very big change, and yeah, kind of not what I expected, because one of those, in my opinion, best functioning markets has been the tactical destroyer markets. Let's move on to the cruisers then. Here is the Legion, went below 180s, bouncing just a touch, but still pretty low. 181 for the sellers, 167 for the buyers. I'd say this makes the Legion pretty cheap at the moment, considering the min-max prices. Then we've got the Loki. Actually, average prices are very, very close to 200 million and not moving too much. So 200 million to 182. I'm gonna guess that, yeah, it's very hard to actually grab a Loki from the buy orders at the moment. It's gonna be a little bit easier in all likeliness for the Legion. Then we get the Proteus going down substantially after the CCP boost that allowed it to get 5 heavy drones, and we are now at 187 to 166 million. If you're looking for the cheap jumping point, then Proteus at the moment does seem to be there. And then the Tango is actually pretty stable with buy opportunities close to 180, so I'm expecting 191 to 178 actually for the buyers on this one. Overall, I think they're reasonable and way more stable, these Tech Tree cruiser markets. Of course, this isn't stability, but this is a CCP doing, of course. A change on a single ship is causing a single spike across the board, but most of these are actually pretty stable, decently affordable, and in an interesting spot. So not much to do here, in my opinion, in the Tech Tree ship market at the moment, except if you really want to. If you want to do a trade, then I would say you can try to buy the Proteus at the moment. And then for the extra product for the week, I am going to choose the fuel blocks, because they do seem to be dropping off. So are coolants, or the PI segments. So let's take a look at these coming in at 56, let's say. And yeah, let's just see what's happening here on these charts. That is the feeling that I got. Look at the change here, the dynamic, and all of this is probably also due to more availability of ice and everything. But helium fuel blocks, 1 year low point, well below 15,000. This 13.3 to 13,000 basically for the buyers, and we started here at 25 and even a high point of 30,000. This another 50% decrease in price. Hydrogen fuel blocks, same story. 30k right here at the start, well below 15k, and we're talking practically 13,000 for the average price. I remember having to fuel my structures back in the good old Detal days. 18k was a good day when I was able to buy fuel blocks for 18,000 ISK. 20k was like, yeah, this starts to hurt, this starts to be pretty expensive. To see them at 13,000 ISK at the moment, here buyers even at 11,000 ISK for nitrogen fuel blocks. 25 again, 30k at the high point, lost 50% and more. And oxygen fuel block, same story, went even to 35,000. It's currently selling for 13.7, buyers at 13,000 ISK. So the story here in fuel blocks, I think, is interesting. I do think that this could be more than just the increased availability, for instance, of ice, but also the very punishing way that things have changed for structure holders. Small corporations, solo players are basically pushed out of that content. I don't have a problem with it or anything like that. I'm just saying that that was probably a huge amount of fuel consumption that's gone with that as well. And so individuals, yeah, if you really want to structure gameplay, you're gonna have to join larger groups, because you have to be able to defend your structures yourself. And I'm kind of guessing that what's happening right now heading for those 1 year low points of 13,000 disc, is that the market is starting to incorporate the fact that in wormhole space they're going to make it even harder for groups to keep structures in wormhole space, because you now need basically, I think it was like a 36-hour control of the wormhole, and then you can just smack down any of those smaller structures pretty damn easily. That's going to again push down the amount of structures in the game in general, and thus probably the fuel consumption as well. Not really sure where all of this is going, of course, and as I've said many times at this point, I think FanFest is going to be quite crucial to see where the game is heading. I'm personally kind of curious at this point what CCP will announce. And that's it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.